Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So it looks like Nigel Farage has lost J.K. Rowling now. She thinks he's too woke because he wants to defer sentencing decisions for trans people to experts. The reason for Farage's insufficiently pure transphobia is, of course, partly because, unlike Labour, maybe he realises it's not that worthwhile a platform to stand on, but partly because he's trying to appeal to more moderate voters. But this attempt at moderation of certain policies is increasingly attracting major criticism from famous figures on the far right. Is Farage risking alienation of his core support, or does he think it's secure enough to piss off some famous nutters? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, J.K. Rowling, one of the most prominent transphobic voices in the country, has decided Nigel Farage is too woke. This began when Reform UK's policy advisor for prisons ruled out a one-size-fits-all approach to imprisoning trans people and suggested that individual risk assessments are needed. When Farage was personally asked about it, he said he'd never worked in a prison, so he was not in the best place to say what's best. But he backed up his advisor and said, look, people who have worked in prison said risk assessments are probably the way to go, which gives him a massive exit ramp to change his position in the future, should it be necessary, of course. Though his explanation was a bit weird. See, indeed, he doesn't have experience of prisons, and so deferring policy like this to those who do sounds good in isolation. You go, well, that's good. If only more politicians would do that. However, he also has no experience of a whole load of sectors where he thinks he's an absolute expert. So Farage's position on this one is clearly driven by an understanding that trans issues are not going to be fertile ground for his campaign, beyond maybe a bit of, toilets is sport, and that he needs to focus on winning over moderate support with issues which matter more to the public. It is likely a sign that Farage is serious about winning power now. There were doubts before, but why moderate positions like this if you just want to be the rabble-rouser on the outside? Apart from anything else, Reform UK with this policy are effectively saying trans people exist, at least, which is not something J.K. Rowling believes. Populists don't generally tone down their rhetoric unless they're serious about widening their appeal. Now, I've said it before, it's a strange sight. We have the Tories trying to become more extreme in order to attract back reform votes, that they're losing more and more support from their own base. But as the Tories are moving to the extremes, Reform UK are edging close to the centre. I'm not sure they're going to ever move to the centre, but they're certainly moving towards it. And although this opens up new opportunities to win votes, as indeed it has done over the last year, it also risks stretching their supply lines to their core support. Because one thing about extremists, they tend not to be in compromising mood. And we know from polling straight after the last election, the vast majority of Reform UK voters weren't using their vote to try. Most of them didn't believe that they would win. They certainly didn't believe Reform UK would win power. They didn't even believe their Reform UK candidate would win in their own constituency. So Reform UK have a lot of people supporting them who won't necessarily vote pragmatically. And it's not just trans issues where Farage isn't following the paint by numbers for fascist mould either. So remember how he started. Like, for years, Nigel Farage was like, he billed himself as the ultimate outsider, didn't he? He wasn't just another politician in a suit. No. He was the guy in the pub, pint in hand and everything, speaking uncomfortable truth to the Westminster elite. He built a movement on a foundation of clear, uncompromising principles, right? His message, very simple, very powerful. He promised to end the influence of out-of-touch bureaucrats, take on the political class. At the absolute core of this was a hardline stance on immigration and national sovereignty. He built his name on promises of dramatically reducing net migration and, of course, leaving the European Union. So he wasn't just a politician. He was a symbol of defiance. He told his followers that he was their voice, their revolt against a system that had failed them. People followed him not because he was polished, but because he wasn't. They believed him because he seemed to say what he meant. That's what people will still say now, even when they disagree with him. But he says it like it is. He's at least he's honest. No. He was the champion of the forgotten, the man who would finally put British interests first. That was the promise they put their faith in. But a new picture is emerging. One that suggests the man who promised a revolution is now quietly negotiating a surrender of those principles that brought him to the dance, as far as some on the far right see it anyway. You know, the fiery anti-establishment rhetoric, that's still there. Oh, no, that hasn't stopped. But it's been supplemented by something a bit more calculated under the rug, more mainstream, for his original base more frustrating. The evidence is not hidden either. It's right there in his party's official proposals. We could start with the economy. The Farage of old, the leader of UKIP, he championed the small state, low tax vision of Britain. Typical Thatcherite, right? But the new Farage, leader of Reform UK, is leading a party with a very different economic plan. Their 2024 manifesto, the contract they called it, contained huge spending pledges, which his actually most recent speech seemed to actually expand on. Most significantly, they pledged to raise the income tax personal allowance to £20,000. On the surface, tax cuts sound fantastic, right? But independent analysis from people like the Institute for Fiscal Studies showed, well, these sums don't add up, mate. And its plans would require substantial cuts to public services that he doesn't talk about. That's not the language of pure fiscal conservatism. That is more like what happened with the Tories since Boris Johnson. That is a multi-billion-pound list of promises that has led critics in the media to dub the plan Liz Truss on steroids. It's a clear warning of what the Tories did. He's aping what the Tories did in their last parliament, the one where they became stunningly unpopular. Basically, Farage is adopting the economic policies that the Conservatives pursued in government over the last few years. And the shift runs even deeper on his signature issue, immigration. See, the promise was always clear. You're just going to stop it, right? Take back control. His base was built on the idea of not just a dramatic reduction in net migration, just basically none. His new position is a lot more moderate. Asylum aside, he still fires all of his ammo at asylum seekers. But he no longer talks of just slashing numbers across the board. Farage, he'll still talk about net zero migration now and then. But the official Reform UK policy documents only talk about freezing non-essential immigration. Well, as the Tories and Labour now already freeze some essential immigration, that could actually mean increasing net migration. What does non-essential mean? According to Reform UK, migration would still be allowed for essential skills. You know the word work. With caps for sectors like healthcare, they say. So that's going to, as I say, lengthen the queue to get a doctor, because a good third of doctors are from overseas. They talk about time-limited work permits that are separate from a path to settlement. So in other words, they're going to make visas even less appealing. And what does this do when they talk about for essential skills? What does that mean? So who does the crap jobs? Reform UK voters, they're going to be the ones having to do those crap jobs. That is a world away from the hardline rhetoric that fired up his base. It's a managed immigration policy. It's basically Priti Patel's immigration policy. It's not the sharp halt many of the followers think they're getting with their vote. He's getting the party ready in government to adopt more realistic policies. Still incredibly bad policies, but ones that you can physically implement. Doesn't involve declaring war with France. These policies are no longer a locked door, it's a revolving one. Completely new set of rules. And for a base that was promised a fortress, this new, much more porous border will seem like a profound betrayal of the core mission if he gets into power and they see what happens. Farage seems to be hoping his supporters won't pay attention to the details until it's too late. So why the change? Why would the ultimate political insurgent risk alienating the very people who gave him that massive platform? Well, the answer's fairly simple and cynical. It's power. This isn't about conviction anymore. It seems he wants to win power. So it's calculation. Farage has seen an opportunity. A year ago, maybe he was still happy just to, the force on the right pulling the Conservatives in a particular direction and then let them win power when he was happy with them. Now it seems because he believes he can overtake them, that's what he's going to do. So he's dangling high spending policies to attract disillusioned voters, whilst hoping his legacy on Brexit and culture wars keeps his right-wing flank secure. He's not content with being a disruptive force on the sidelines anymore, it seems. Some suggest his ambition now is to at least be kingmaker, but actually probably much more. He's openly stated he sees the 2024 election He said that was the first important step on the road to 2029. So even last year, we were talking about long-term aims. To get there, he had to broaden his appeal, which is what we've seen over the last year. He needs to move from being the leader of a protest movement to the leader of a credible political party. Because all the leader of a protest movement can do is stop the party, the credible party on their wing of politics from winning. So that's meant he's had to soften the edges and present a palatable platform to more moderate voters. So he's trying to become the thing he spent most of his career railing against, a mainstream political operator. He's adopting the tactics of the parties he's mocked in the past. He's making massive and unfunded promises to woo swing voters. But this gamble carries an immense risk. As he moves towards the centre on these issues, he's creating space on his right. Now, at the moment, there isn't another party there, but the Conservatives are moving there. The rumblings of discontent are growing louder. Figures on the political right and some former allies are publicly criticising him for compromising. You know, it's not J.K. Rowling's just the latest. There's been others. We've had Elon Musk. We've had Tommy Robinson. You know, these are his own people who now see him as just another politician selling out, trading authenticity for power. While he continues to push right-wing buttons on issues like scrapping net zero targets, remember, that is against what most of his voters want. So that's not something that keeps them on side. That pushes them away. But his shift on those core issues that does bring them in, economics and immigration, that's not gone completely unnoticed. A lot of the core support may not be paying attention to it. But if you've got famous figures on the right that they listen to calling it out, is that a risk? The accusation is he's trading principle for ambition, a decision his original base may not forgive. We know from polling they're prepared to vote for someone even if they don't think they can win. They're not pragmatic voters. You know, as I say, he's had Elon Musk, Tommy Robinson, now J.K. Rowling calling him out for abandoning principles, of being too weak, or in Rowling's case, too woke. Could we end up with a situation whereby the Tories and Reform UK somehow sort of flip for a bit, eating votes in each other's target seats? Now, Kemi Badenoch has said that the Tories should focus on rural areas. Now, in theory, an advantage for Farage because those are not the seats he's targeting. If the Tories want to sort of make little or no effort in the key reform battlegrounds, Farage may be able to count on the far-right vote, even if they grumble about his compromises. But what if Badenoch's replacement, because I still think there's going to be a replacement at some point, changes tack completely? Along with the projects Labour have in the works, which people don't notice now, but they will in the next couple of years, what if Farage suddenly finds himself stranded as we lead up to the next election? Which way will he go? Will he moderate further to try to keep those moderate voters on side? Will he do what the Tories are doing now and try and push into ever further uncomfortable territory to try and hold on to those votes, further enraging the sort of voices with a lot of reach in the media? Or does he retreat back to his base and return to the role of just stopping the Tories winning power? But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.